Coming up on today's show.
How to tackle what can be a really overwhelming task when you're dealing with seniors.
They just feel overwhelmed and don't know where to start. Is that kind of a common feeling?
Whether someone's moving or not, but most often people have to move because of a life event.
Organizing seniors today on Keeping You Organized. Hello and welcome to Keeping You Organized in our new year, 2018, and all kinds of, the beginning of the year, people like to get organized. It doesn't matter how old you are, but today we're going to kind of focus on the elderly or seniors. I know there's a big definition for that, but how do seniors get organized, and what are some of the challenges that we're dealing with there? And we're going to bring on a new podcast guest, Joanna Laws. Joanna, welcome to Keeping You Organized.
Thank you.
And what is the name of your organizing company, by the way?
My business is called Smooth Transitions of Kingwood and North Houston.
Okay, great. So you probably were involved in the floods earlier in the fall?
Yes, not personally, one street over, but a lot of people around us, definitely.
Wow,
yes.
That was quite the event. We did another podcast with Ellen DeLapp, who's also from that area, about getting organized for an emergency. So, well, anyway, today we're going to talk about organizing seniors, and that may sound like a huge task, but this is something you do every day. How do we want to kind of, eat the elephant one bite at a time? Where do we start when we're talking about organizing with seniors?
Well, that's a great way to lead in, and a very common question I get from seniors, clients, and their families is how to tackle what can be a really overwhelming task when you're dealing with seniors. Oftentimes you're dealing with a large amount of quantity just because of people's age. We tend to accumulate things, and it's really common. So with seniors, it's really good to just start a little bit at a time, and that's the way to do it, is just one baby step at a time. And that's something that I can do and I can help with, is break down that task.
Great. Well, listen, during these shows, we oftentimes like to use examples. You don't use people's names or anything like that, but sometimes stories kind of illustrate best. I would imagine that there's probably a story or a client you've worked with, or maybe many, that they just feel overwhelmed and don't know where to start. Is that kind of a common feeling?
Absolutely. That's probably the most common thread, is overwhelming. That's the most of the time I get a contact or a phone call is going to be from somebody who, believes they can do this themselves. And most people are capable of doing it unless they have physical or emotional limitations. But most often it's just where to start. And that's something that I help people with all the time. And I do have lots of stories. I need to start writing them down. But most of the time it's, I don't know where to start. It could be a lot of clutter. It could be a little bit of clutter. It could also be, a very small house. It could be storage units. It could be lots of different things. I get people who call and say, I just want to get the house organized. I need to clean out my garage. Maybe someone is downsizing, getting ready to move, and they can't take everything with them, and they literally just don't know what to do with all of their, quote, stuff.
Yeah, and I would imagine there's a lot of different scenarios. There's not one size that fits all, but let's kind of focus in a little bit on downsizing, because that's a real common one. Maybe earlier in the senior years, someone's lived in that big 2-story house, 3,000 square feet, whatever, and 30 or 40 years, and they decide, the kids have moved out, and all of a sudden it's, gosh, we don't need all this space here. We're overwhelmed. So, Joanna, they come to you, and how do you kind of ease them into this process of going from a big place maybe to a townhouse or another place to live?
Absolutely. A very common scenario, whether someone's moving or not, but most often people have to move because of a life event. Something's happened, or they want to be near their children. So what we'll do is everything, when you're starting to downsize, every scrap of paper, every single thing just takes on even more meaning. The emotional attachment to things becomes even more prolific. And I'm dealing with not just people's things, but also the emotional side of it. And it's easier for somebody outside the family to tackle this because my attachment is, I'm objective. I can help them decide. And I'm never going to come into a home and say, you need to get rid of this, you need to get rid of that, even if it's quote trash. Something may have a meaning to somebody that I don't understand. So I have to balance listening to somebody talk about different things and be expeditious because they're paying me to start their downsizing process. So I try to start first with the less emotional things, maybe a kitchen area, a dining area, and work my way to pictures and mementos and things like that.
Yeah, we'll touch on those memories in a moment because I know that's a big issue. Even dealing with my own
Yes.
parents on that. But how about So let's just do something more simple like a dining room. So maybe a big house had serving pieces for a big party of 15 or 17 or 18 or whatever it is, and
Right.
going into this little one bedroom townhome or whatever it is. How do you coach the client on, what to take with them and what do we do with the other stuff?
Right, absolutely. That's a great way to start. People will always say, well, I'm going to have somebody over. Even if they're in a one bedroom apartment, they might say, well, I'm still going to have company. So I can't start right away saying that's not a realistic process or come across as judgmental. So what I'll usually say is, well, why don't we keep a serving plates for 4 because you'll probably have a few people over. You don't have more room in your apartment for more than 4 people with chairs. So usually by the end of the process, they'll be willing to maybe even go down a little bit further on that. But generally, that's how I start. I'll try to half things quantity wise first. Instead of going, from 12 to 1, I'll go 12 to 6, and then we'll try to go down a little more. And then dealing with the rest of it, I always encourage people first to give to their family, give to their friends, even if what's very common now is the children of these seniors don't want or don't have room for things. It's still nice to be able to maybe tell them, hey, you know what, next holiday, enjoy your nice china with your family. Have some, talks about the times you had enjoying those things. And then just if you want to sell them or donate them, give them to a friend, that's the best way to probably get, downsize and get it out of the home.
Now, when you typically deal with a senior doing this, is this something that takes several sessions? And like, for example, selling that, would you wait and put a bunch of stuff together and sell it, or would you sell it a little bit at a time, or is there really no right answer to that?
It does vary, but as a general rule, selling piecemeal is not going to usually be very cost effective. It can cost the client a lot of money and their net result's probably not going to be very good. And again, whereas children don't want a lot of these things, a lot of the collectibles and fine china, people just don't want anymore. And so they're not going to get a lot of money, even though there is a value to the client and perhaps there'd be a value to the right buyer. It's really going to be difficult to sell things a little bit at a time. Not that there's not a way to do that for the right item if there's an antique armoire or some really, really old pieces. But I usually wait to accumulate everything and try to do it all at once, whether it's through an estate sale or an auction. The best case scenario is to have all the family come through first, take what they want, and then whatever's left over that they're not moving with them to their new community or home, we would sell that.
Okay, great. Well, listen, we're going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, I want to kind of continue on this downsizing and maybe get a little bit more into those emotional things, because maybe some of this stuff is not as hard to part with, but other things have memories. So we're with Joanna Laws from Smooth Transitions Houston, an organizing company, and we'll be right back. Now, there's a place just for you. Life can be busy, and you still have to keep it all together. That's why you like to be organized and in control. Introducing MyOrganized.life, a special place where you can get ideas and solutions to organize what's important to you, your important papers, your important decisions, your important life events. We show you the ideas and products to stay organized in your life. See what's new. Stop by and say hello. Visit us at any time at www.myorganized.life. It's just for you. MyOrganized.life by Smead. Find us at www.myorganized.life. MyOrganized.life. We're back now on Keeping You Organized, talking about organizing seniors, going through that stage of life, and there's a lot of different scenarios, and we're with Joanna Laws from Smooth Transitions Houston, talking about downsizing right now, which is just one of the different scenarios. It could be downsizing to move into a smaller place or just wanting to get less stuff. And Joanna, before the break, we talked about, maybe some of the stuff that doesn't have as much emotional attachment to it. But how about some of those things that, let's say, for example, pictures. I know when I was going through this with my parents, you say, okay, well, what about this picture? And they look at it, and this is one of, 50,000 pictures, they have. And then they want to start telling the story about it. And then it's really hard for them to, what do you do in that situation? What do you coach people on?
Right. Pictures are probably the best example of an item someone's going to be emotionally attached to. And again, someone who's a senior is going to have, hundreds and hundreds, if not more, albums and pictures to sort through. I won't stand over somebody and watch them, look through every picture. That's not going to be a good use of their time. They're paying me a lot of money to be there. But what I usually do is I'll start out and listen to, some of the stories and kind of get people warmed up. And then there are lots of different strategies for photos. That could be a whole nother interview. But I tell people on their own, with a cup of tea or with their family even, to start sorting out the pictures that have the people in them are the best ones to keep. Mm-hmm. If you've got a picture that you don't recognize, you say, oh, where is this? That needs to go in another pile. Pictures of scenery and things like that. Those are moments we're trying to capture because they were so beautiful to us, but over time they lose their meaning. We forget where they are. So the pictures with the people are the main things to focus on, and look at duplicates, or if someone's missing from a picture, get rid of those. That's a really good way to do a first pass, and photos actually usually take a couple of passes to sort through.
All right. How about a physical item? I'm thinking back to my parents who went to Turkey many years ago and bought these copper pots, which was probably at a flea market. So the value of them was probably not very high, but there was such a attachment to that. None of the kids really wanted them. How do you, and then I guess the point I'm making, it could be those pots, it could be anything that takes up a lot of room, physically a lot of room. How do you kind of coach them through that process of saying, in your new place, you're not going to have room for these? I mean, do you reference that, or how do you get someone to, say goodbye to something like that?
Absolutely. That's a great example. And we do tend to collect a lot of things, mementos, and even the small things. You want to think about what you're taking with you. But I encourage people, and, talk to your family about the time, to let them tell the story about where they found that, whether it was at a flea market or how they came about it. And the experience is the reason that they picked that up in the first place. So to help them relive that, and you may have a family member kind of write it down and then take a photo of that piece and write down in script, or if you want to type it up, and put those pictures in an album. So you still have the visual of those mementos with you, but you don't have the physical things with you any longer. Right. But it's a good way to keep that memory alive.
Now, when you're going through this process of downsizing too, are you doing anything like kind of keeping a list or track of that new space and how much space they're going to have to make sure what they are keeping is going to fit?
Absolutely. That's one of the first things I do. And sometimes, if possible, sometimes I'm working with someone and they don't exactly know where they're going to be moving. Okay. But I have, because I've been doing this so long, a pretty good idea of what a typical layout is going to be in a community. If they're moving to a house, that could be a different scenario. But I encourage people to keep things that are multifunctional. If you've got an open 4-leg table, that's not going to get as much use space-wise when you could have a cabinet, if it's got drawers or doors in it, something that you could use as a multi-purpose kind of piece. So we start eyeing those things early on, things that would have more than one use. And then we usually narrow it down from there. And of course, people want to have all their things with them. But generally, not everything's going to fit.
Okay. All right. Well, that's kind of the downside. Is there anything else in the downsizing scenario before we move on that you want to add, or that we maybe didn't touch on?
No, I think that it's just important. And if anybody's watching this and they want to work with their own family, it's so easy to go in when it's not your thing, not your items, to say, you don't need this. But when you're dealing with seniors, just be aware of the fact that everything's going to have some meaning, especially if they're about to have to let it go. And just to work and ease toward it and not try to just throw everything away right away.
Okay, great. All right, well, let's move on to another scenario. 'Cause that was downsizing. Some seniors maybe don't want to move out, but they want to help kind of get maybe a little more organized or get rid of stuff. Maybe in anticipation in a few years they may have to downsize. How is that situation a little different?
That's different in that if they want to quote age in place, that's sort of the phrase that you'll hear tossed about. People decide to stay in their home, and a lot of people want to do that. They've got a lot of equity in their home, or for different reasons, they want to stay in their house. So we'll deal with maybe clearing a bigger path for someone who has some mobility issues, try to make things more accessible for people if they've got maybe arthritis or other physical issues, far-reaching things. We want to put things a little more accessible at arm's length. Sometimes I'm dealing with people who are maybe they've had a life event injury, maybe they've injury and they're coming home from rehab, and a lot of social workers will not release somebody from a hospital until their home is made safe. So I do get a lot of those situations where I'm coming in and there's maybe just one room that's really cluttered, but it's not safe for someone with a walker or a wheelchair to go in there. And I will clear that space, try to make more use of the vertical space so they're not having to bend down, through the back of closets, so there's less risk of falls.
Okay.
And things like that.
Well, I think we have a lot more to discuss on this and maybe some other scenarios, but we're kind of out of time on this episode. Are you willing to come back next time and kind of continue this discussion? Because I think we have a lot more to cover.
You bet.
Okay. Well, before we go, just tell people a little bit how they can get a hold of you and what kind of services you offer.
So Smead Transitions is actually a big company. We have multiple locations around the United States. I happen to be in the North Houston area. My website is www.smoothtransitionskwhouston.com, very long. But there are other locations around the United States. If you go to movingforseniors.com, if you live in one area or your children are across the country, you can find someone local to help your family.
Oh, awesome. And so if people want to reach you by phone, you want to put out your phone number too?
Sure. It's 832-651-8660.
Okay. And you primarily work in the Houston metro area, or do you do any like virtual or over the phone or over the FaceTime kind of consulting?
Absolutely. I'm willing to do that. We do have territory, so I would need to be mindful if there's another location, but
Sure.
We really work together, a lot of us. So yeah, absolutely. That would be great. If anybody has any questions, they're always welcome to email or call me.
Great. And we'll have your contact information on the show notes page for this particular episode. And we'll be back next time, folks. Gonna continue and finish this conversation on organizing seniors next time on Keeping You Organized.